In our choices, it's our job to lift their voices. I gotta pay respect to the movement that is hip-hop, the people that create to express how that beat drop, the words of the silence telling stories for a cause. I'm thankful for the artists who stood up to spit how it was. I'm native and I'm peaceful, but I'm tripping like the voyage, tired of the greed, deceit, destroying earth like we can make it without water or air. She ain't ours, we are hers, and we cannot compare. Our job is to preserve, though we don't deserve to remain. We can't contain our ego, don't live equal, need to reframe. Rich folks make systems of fear and hypocrisy while we subdue the margin of this so-called democracy. I'm native and I'm peaceful, standing rock hard like Dakota. North, south, bring east and west, we're gonna show up. Check your privilege and your comfort, your history and reflect. Don't confuse protect with protest, and instead use the platform for a cause and listen when the earth says, without me those lungs of yours are so gone. Without earth these lungs of ours are so gone.
Feel the same except the lingo and the style. The struggles have built up, it's on the kids to change meanwhile. Brothers in the streets, sisters crying in the sheets. Mama's on the phone saying, what happened, baby? Look at this world we have created. We got needles on the streets. Little kids scared to speak, hurt so bad it's hard to breathe. Tell me there's not a better way. Give me proof that there's not more to say. Show me all the work you've done. You don't know how far I've come. Should've told me at age 6 that my life was gonna change. People got me pegged for rude, but I'm just trying not to cave. Daddy left when I was 6. System held both of us. Mama played both parts. It broke both of our hearts. Flipped upside down, I've been kicked to the ground. Had to build myself back up to understand I will still fall. Not ashamed of all my past, it has made me who I am. Carry my team on my back and educate on this track. Our destiny is not to manifest anger and pain. Use the voice that you have to help create a better path. Mass incarceration to mass deportations. Police brutality stem from racist mentality. Can't you see the pattern? No dabble, no black snake, no pipeline, racist hate, no costumes and no chains. Use any outlet that you love, stand up and make a change. Not for the money and the fame, for the generations we create.
Think of
Welcome to today's Reclaiming Native Psychological Brilliance series. My name is Brian Hendricks from USET, and Emily will start with some housekeeping tips.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Emily. We are building a community here, so please go ahead and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're joining us from today. We really like to know the reach of these sessions. Everyone's going to be muted until the participant reflections portions towards the end of the hour, but feel free to participate in the chat throughout the presentation, and you will receive a link to the recording and presentation by the end of the week. Next. Okay, disclosures. This activity is jointly provided by United South and Eastern Tribes and Cardia Services. With that, we are excited to offer you continuing education units for completing this hour with us. You will have to complete a survey, which I will share a couple times throughout the hour in the chat. And we are offering medical, nursing, social work, and counseling credit units. Or you can also request a completion certificate. And this is also available for watching the recorded session later on if you can't stay the whole time. And yeah, completing this activity, you have to stay for the hour or watch the full recording and complete the online evaluation link, which I will share. And there are no relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies for those involved with the ability to control the content of this activity. And with that, I will pass it over.
Hi, everybody. This is Holly Echohawk. Welcome again to our session today. I know that Bernice from Jordan from USET normally does the welcome, but she is in an airport and I'm not sure she's able to get on at the moment. Brian, is she on or should we move forward?
She was on, but we can move forward. She's not, I don't think she's now.
Okay, we all know what it's like to try to do a webinar in an airport. She's on her way to the National Indian Health Board. Okay, all right, let's go on then. Emily, are you doing this or would you like me to do it?
I'll do this.
Okay, thank you.
So just to let you know that we are on Indigenous land. To learn and acknowledge what tribal nation land you and your organization are standing on, go to the link on the screen or text your zip code or city to the number provided on the screen. And as Emily said, we are building a community. So we are reconnecting our Indigenous community. Thank you for being a part of our Reclaiming Our Collective Stories. The data is gathered from the registration data. And I'll turn it over to Holly.
Yes, I'm super happy to see everybody. It's really exciting to see where everyone's from. And I might note that our national map that we use, it's not one dot per person. It's a bunch of people for each of those dots. We've had about 2,000 people who've participated in the session since January, and that's what the map reflects. So just a quick review, the past sessions, as you all know, we started in January. Everything under the Reclaiming Native Psychological Brilliance heading. We went through all these various topics. They're all available online if you would like to review them again. Many people review them. We've had over 500 people review at post-session reviews, actually over 600 people on some of these. So they are available. So if we can go to the next slide. So today's session is titled Inspiring Native Life Transformation, Strength-Based Resources and Crisis Preparedness. Native life transformation. That is our way of saying the old dated term of a treatment plan or a case plan. We prefer to look at it at life transformation plan. There's a couple of things I want to go over really quickly. I have 2 slides I want to go over with you all and share some information because we want to get to our keynote speaker, which is super exciting. So on native life transformation, meaning the old phrase treatment plan, case plan. So important first steps in treatment and recovery for Native people. Obviously, it's understanding their Native strengths and the community context from where they're from and the strengths of that community. We take a positive assumption of innate intelligence in every Native person. So understanding their strengths and community context, super important as a first step in treatment and recovery planning. We also know that often overlooked are that individual person's cultural connectedness, or maybe they're not completely at this point in their life tightly linked to their Native community, but they know they're unique. self-recognition that they are culturally distinct and that they're native or they're part native, and they're proud of that. So that self-recognition of being unique is often overlooked in treatment planning. As well, the other thing that's often overlooked is native therapeutic practices that are effective for building resilience and treatment and recovery. So two cautions, one caution and one tip in life transformation plans. And many of you listening have that responsibility, which is huge, to work with your client, your patient, your relative, and developing a new pathway for them. So one caution is to really be aware of worldview differences in developing your plan, especially if you're working off of an organizational form. Our behavioral health templates tend to be grounded in medical model behavioral health, which is a Western worldview perspective. Western worldview perspective, by its nature, I'm not saying this is good, I'm just saying this is reality, promotes superiority. Western worldview is superior over all else, basically. Sometimes that is reflected in the form or process that you're using. It's either overtly there in terms of maybe some discriminatory language that's dated, that's still in your plan, or covertly, the T's left off of that, or covertly, more subtle systemic racism, systemic discrimination that's embedded in the process that you use for the plan. So really pay attention to the worldview perspective on the guide that you're using. Might be time to reassess that. So the tip is to check and see if your organization's process for developing life transformation plans, and maybe they still call them treatment plans, or maybe they call them a case plan. Even that language is dated. So check to see if whatever process your organization use, see if it really truly supports patient native voice and control, native life context, native, does it have space to assess or query about native spiritualism with the person, maybe it's past or present. But so I just want to share those quick tips with you. And the next slide, I want to share with you two resources that you can use to help update, reassess, revisit your planning process. One is the cultural connectedness scale. You all are probably very familiar with that. It basically is a tool that lists a range of native strengths. And there's the link to it, which is the California version. It was developed in Canada by Angela Snowshoes and her team, First Nations, but it was modified by Native American Health Board in California. So that's the link to the California tool, which gives you an at-a glance of the tool itself. And so if you just take a peek at those questions, if you haven't seen them, it might give you some ideas on life transformation plans. When you click on that, don't get fooled. It tries to go to a sales pitch of downloading a software, but you don't have to do that. Just scroll down till you get to the PDF and download the PDF. The second tool I want to share with you is called the Structural Vulnerability Assessment Tool, one of my most favorite tools. It is a series of questions that assess life needs across 6 different domains. Economic stability, like, do you have enough money to live safely? Questions about food. Do you have enough food every day? Basic questions for my special interest in this is because it includes a few basic questions for the person you're seeing, like, have you experienced discrimination based on skin color? And also silent questions for the provider. May some other providers or me find it difficult to work with this patient because of their behavior, the way they look, the way they communicate, the way they smell. So it's a really great tool to look at some very basic educational literacy, discrimination, other factors that are not necessarily addressed in a life transformation plan that are really gets to the real barriers that might prevent a way forward. Another question for providers in that tool is, would some providers feel this patient deserves their plight because of their lifestyle or their appearance? So it asks some pretty harsh questions that the provider can silently ask themselves, which I think are really important. So I want to share that with you and the link as well to the structural vulnerability assessment tool. And I'm really glad that I ran across that some years back, and I think it's a valuable additional perspective. So with those two tools, I want to move on to introduce our speaker today. We're really fortunate to have Rochelle Williams with us today. She is the leader of the Native 988 resource in Washington State. She's going to tell you all about it. And I hope you enjoyed the opening video, which also reflected Washington State. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle. And thank you so much, Rochelle, for being here. You bring us, you're going to bring us a lot of knowledge. So, Rochelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rochelle. Thank you so much for the introduction, Holly. I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually coming to you guys from NIHB in Washington, D.C. So I'm just really thrilled to be here for this, to share this work with you. But my name is Rochelle Williams. I am overseeing the tribal operations of Volunteers of America, Western Washington. And importantly, I'm an enrolled member of the Ahadasat First Nation, which is located on northern Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. I'm also a descendant of the Tulalip tribes in Washington State, where I call home. So today I want to start this off in a good way by acknowledging the lands that we work on at Volunteers of America, Western Washington. Volunteers of America, Western Washington is on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, particularly Tulalip, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Saxuatl, under the Treaty of Point Elliott signed in 1855. Tribes and nations ceded millions of acres of their land in exchange for a small amount of money and permanent protection by the United States government. Importantly, the treaties also specified the tribes retained their fishing, hunting, and gathering rights. The Treaty of Point Elliott remains as relevant today as it was in 1855. We also acknowledge the tribal governments and their roles today in taking care of these lands. VOA Western Washington serves 8 counties throughout the state, but our tribal programs serve all 29 federally recognized tribes and nations in Washington, as well as the unrecognized First Nations and anyone tribally affiliated that resides in Washington State, whether their tribe is in Washington or if it's located elsewhere. We strive to be better and do better as allies to our tribal communities. We see you, respect your right to sovereignty and self-determination, and are committed to being better listeners, learners, and lifting all Indigenous voices. Next slide, please. So today, during our time together, we hope to tell the story of the development of the Native and Strong Lifeline. We want to share with you where we are at in the journey and what is to come. We have lots of exciting news about that. We want to give you an overview of our sister program and the continuum of care with the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub. And we hope to have time to answer any questions and listen to any comments that you might have. Next slide, please. So what is the Native and Strong Lifeline? Why are we here and what are we talking about? The Native and Strong Lifeline is the first statewide American Indian Alaska Native specific suicide and crisis line. Native and Strong is a part of Washington State 988 funding. The Native and Strong Lifeline exists because of the passage of House Bill 1477, which acknowledged the need for this service for the 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington State. The Native and Strong Lifeline is operated by and for Indigenous people. So here's how the Native and Strong Lifeline works. So right now, the Native Strong Lifeline is going to be accessible by dialing 988. and pressing a dial pad option. So right now, if you called 988 in Washington State, you would press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line and another number for the Spanish speaking line, which I don't know because I don't speak Spanish. So I know that those are 2 options, but in the future, in the very near future, you will be able to, for example, press 4 to be directly connected to the Native and Strong Lifeline. So that's really exciting for us. It is operational 24/7, 365 days a year, just like the other lifelines. Native and Strong Lifeline calls are also answered by other natives. So everyone that calls, their call will be taken by another Indigenous person. Native and tribal crisis counselors answer first with their tribal affiliation. So for example, if I was a crisis counselor, I would answer and say, hi, this is Rochelle. I'm an enrolled member of the Hadasat First Nation. We believe that this kind of opens up the door for people to say something about themselves too, if they choose to. This service is not only for enrolled tribal members, but it is also for descendants and those who are closely affiliated with their Native community or tribe. Next slide, please. Before I start this one, I do want to say it's really important to understand that while we're presenting this to everybody across Indian country, and we're so excited to share this model with everybody, it has to be known that right now this is only a Washington State service. So we do hope to share this work with you in hopes that other states will do the same, and you'll have a model to work with. So we like to share our information, but right now it's only for Washington State. So the people that can access this Tribal 988 is any tribally affiliated person in the state of Washington. This includes American Indians, Alaskan Natives, First Nations, tribally enrolled and unenrolled people who are of Indigenous descent. This service is not specific to any one Washington State tribe, but is actually inclusive of all tribal people in the state, whether their tribe is located in Washington State or located somewhere else. Your call in Washington State, it will not be denied. Not only can individual people access the service, but so can a concerned family member, Indian healthcare providers, social workers, anybody that you can think of that would want to help another person, another Indigenous person, and support them. They can call this line for support. Next slide, please. So you see these 2 beautiful young men here. Why do we need the Native and Strong Lifeline? We have been here since time immemorial, but we are always a very underserved population. And at times I know that I feel invisible, and I know that many other Indigenous people feel invisible as well when it comes to receiving appropriate services that are needed. Suicide, as you guys know, disproportionately affects American Indians and Alaska Native people. It is the 2nd leading cause of death among AIAN people aged 10 to 34 years old. The highest rates are among males. And so that's why we have this 30-something and this really younger person, because it's really important that we acknowledge that it's happening to everybody. Death by suicide among AIAN women is up 139% from 1999 to 2017. That's extremely alarming. And so we have a really good reason to have the Native and Strong Lifeline. I know people have asked, like, well, what makes you guys special? And I would say to them, first people first. And it is time for us not to be invisible. So when we went about this work a couple of months ago to actually start working on the program, we had to think of what would we call it? What's in a name and why is that important? So we had to make a lot of major considerations. How do we make it relatable? How do we remain inclusive of all of our fellow natives? What would make me as an Indigenous woman want to call this line, or to even be willing to call this line? What would make an Indigenous man or even a Two-Spirit person want to call? Next slide, please. So I think it's important to explain to you that we did go over some different names and we just were having a hard time landing on the right thing. We considered some of the following and we didn't like them, but it was really difficult to determine. So if you build a program like this, you'll see that you go through these little steps that they seem really minor, but they're huge. So we thought about the Washington State Tribal Suicide and Crisis Line, the Native Help and Crisis Line, Native Support and Helpline. And as you know, none of these worked for us and they were not the right fit. Next slide, please. So where we actually landed. The name Native and Strong Lifeline, it came up as part of another Native behavioral health campaign in our state of Washington, who was using that name. It's an opioid campaign, actually, but they were willing to share that name with us because it was really important. It was a really good name. This made the most sense to us as well, Native and Strong, as it reflected that any Native could call for support, and also that it was not a showing of weakness, but of strength to ask for help. And that's something that we really need to normalize. We wanted to eliminate the word tribal, which typically indicates only enrolled members. We also wanted to eliminate the state part of the name. As many of us, myself included at times, I don't trust much in government run programs or those that maybe we perceive to be run by the government. We also wanted to eliminate that big scary word, which is crisis. A lot of people might not call unless they're really on the verge of suicide. But it was really important that everybody knows that they can call us anytime for any reason, even if they just want to talk to somebody. It doesn't always have to be the most extreme circumstance. One of the things that was important to me is I'm pretty new to crisis services. And so when I was talking with people, they said, well, Rochelle, crisis can mean anything to anybody. And while that is true, if you are not working in behavioral health or crisis services, that word is really scary and it doesn't sound like it's something for me, right? I want to talk about maybe my grandmother passed away, or maybe I'm a grandmother who's now raising my grandchildren and I just want someone to listen. I might not think that that applies to being a crisis. So another portion of this that's important is not forgetting our brothers and sisters. It's important for us to include our unenrolled brothers and sisters in this service. Many of us, I'm sure many of you also have families that share the same blood and at different ages. Some of us are enrolled and some of us are not enrolled. This does not make a person less Native or less Indigenous. Tribal sovereignty allows for tribes and nations to decide who has membership and who can enroll. We also know that this can often change and the requirements are different for every tribe. Many of us have relatives who are unable or unwilling to enroll. That's a true thing that happens. Sometimes people don't want to enroll in their tribes for a variety of reasons. And we refuse to lose more of our people to suicide, whether they have tribal enrollment cards or not. We are the first people of this land, and yet we are the only people that continually have to prove who we are by way of a plastic membership card. And so in my family, I'm fortunate to be enrolled, but not everybody in my family is fortunate enough to be enrolled, depending on when they were born. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you call, people want to know, who am I calling? This is a Native and Strong Lifeline, right? Every crisis counselor at the Native and Strong Lifeline is an Indigenous person. This means that our counselors include enrolled tribal members and descendants who are closely affiliated with their Native communities or tribes. You are calling another Native person who cares to listen and to connect with you. You are connecting with a trained crisis counselor. Just as the non-tribal Lifeline is trained, so are the Native and Strong Lifeline counselors. The training difference is that we have added traditional and cultural elements to our training, as well as more thorough training on historical and intergenerational trauma. Next slide, please. So our team of the Native and Strong Lifeline, we currently have myself, the Tribal Operations Manager, the Native and Strong Lifeline Coordinator, and the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub Coordinator. But the most important people there are the tribal crisis counselors, the Native crisis counselors who are answering the phones. Our counselors and management team are from various tribes across the state and the country, including the Tulalip tribes, the Navajo Nation, Ahadisat First Nation, Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, the Yakama Nation, the Spokane Tribe, the Quileute Nation, Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation, and the Tsimshian Tribe in Alaska. There also will be others. We are onboarding more people, so we'll have those updates later on as to our full staff and who they are. But finding the right people for this program was really important, and we weren't always sure where to begin with that. Not being a sovereign nation, how can you ensure that your staff is all Native? So I'm going to walk you through some of that. In the beginning, we considered only hiring Washington State natives due to us starting in Washington State. However, we decided that it made more sense to hire counselors from Washington and out-of-state tribes for a couple of reasons. One of them is there are times that maybe you want more of a sense of privacy and confidentiality. All the calls are confidential, but again, there's a lot of mistrust in our communities. And so you don't always want to talk to a person who is in your tribe or maybe even in the tribe next door, because we are all so closely related. So it kind of gives you that comfort and that extra protection that, you don't want your business out there. It would never happen. There is confidentiality, but I think it makes us feel a little bit more secure. Second to that, we could hire people in other parts of the country that might have a lower cost of living, but give them Washington State wages. And I know that might sound kind of silly, but these are remote positions. And I imagine in other parts of the country, if you can make a Washington salary and bring it home to your family in another state, I think that's terrific. And that's just another way that we can support other Indigenous people. Next slide, please. Our first hiring flyers. So I am no expert in technology, and it just started with 2 ladies. And so, thanks to Microsoft Word, this is what we created. And we posted all over the country on Indeed, of course, and in different boards. But in Washington State, we created 2 different styles of hiring flyers. And you'll notice that they look completely different from each other. The reason for this is that on one side of the state, you can see in the greener flyer with the totem pole, things look different and we identify with those things more easily. And on the other side of the state in Eastern Washington, which is completely a different landscape, you can see the medicine wheel and some of the colors that might apply more to those tribes. However, we'll get to that in the next slide. So we'll talk about our branding. Okay, so the hiring and interview process. I thought this would be really tricky at first because, again, how can we guarantee that your call will be taken by another Native person when we're not a sovereign nation and we don't have Indian preference where we are? So we believe that creating tension and fear in a job interview is very counterproductive. I've always thought that, but it's really important to our team that we don't instill fear in people that are applying for this role. We believe that people will share more of who they are with you when they are absolutely comfortable and they are not scared or nervous. In fact, we've actually, we've met some really wonderful people in the job interview process, but not everybody was the right fit. When people are really comfortable, you get to know who they are, how they will be on your team, but you also know who definitely is going to not be a good fit for your team. Might be a great fit for another team somewhere else. But people say a lot of things when they're not feeling scared. Some of our interview questions as well, they're not really the typical interview questions like, hey, tell me about yourself, right? So one of the things that we ask is, what is one of the most important things that you have learned from an elder? This is going to do one of 2 things. Like it's going to tell us that they are closely tied with their elders, their community, and their culture. But also it gives that person a chance to think and say, wow, what really have I learned, right? Some self-reflection and just to think about it. So we give them time for that. So you don't have to rush anything. Just let us know, think about that. What have you learned from an elder? We ask them also, are you familiar with the barriers that Native communities have faced in the past and in the present day? And in this part of the interview, that's when people will tell you about their own communities and some of the struggles that they go through and some of the resilience and some of the things that they've learned along the way. So it kind of shows you how closely tied they are. And what does historical trauma mean to you? There are a couple of people that we've interviewed in the past that weren't really sure what that meant. But they knew exactly what it meant. They just didn't have the term for it. So they would explain what they thought it meant. And every Indigenous person was spot on. So our counselors know absolutely what that means. But when they go through our training, they just get a little bit more in depth with historical and intergenerational trauma. One of the things we do is also we ask scenario questions. And what this is really about is communication and the way that Indigenous people communicate with each other. and with others. So I know, like on our reservation, sometimes we have different slang terms and different ways of speaking, and we have eyebrow talkers, and we're really expressive in different ways. So let's say that a young teenage client calls in and explains that she is upset because one of her uncles is bothering her. What would that mean to you? And so most of the Indigenous people that answer this question will say, well, that might indicate a sexual assault, but I'd want to get more information from the caller to see if that's what it was. And some other people, and typically it's non-Indigenous people, because we don't use the same communication all the time, will say, oh, maybe their uncle was picking on them, or they were roughhousing or something like that. And so there really is no right or wrong answer, but it's good to see how people listen and communicate with each other. Next slide, please. All right, so our lived and shared experiences, it's more than paper. So we place a high value on lived experiences. We recruit our staff based on their lived experiences and their desire to participate in our new culture of healing. We do not exclusively recruit based on degrees, but based on experiences in our communities, behavioral health, and other relevant fields. Cultural traditions and understanding are key qualifications in these roles. And so I know this was very controversial at first, and to some it might still be. I have a good education. Many of our staff have a great education. But this, if we're looking at pieces of paper and what people have learned in the Western education system, we're actually putting up barriers for people. If I'm in crisis or I need someone to talk to, it's great if someone was a graduate from somewhere, but I'm not really concerned about that. I'm concerned about someone having listening ears for me. Next slide, please. So back to our branding. So we wanted to make it a brand identity that was unique to us as Washington State Native people. So while creating the Native and Strong Lifeline, we discussed what our branding should look like. It was one of the first things that we did when I arrived there back in January. We knew that we wanted to see something that a Washington State Native could easily identify with. Many programs do not consider that varieties of pan-Indian art and symbolism do not apply to us all. So we hired a Coast Salish artist, Lummi and Nooksack. His name is Jason Leclaire. He created a logo, which is the eagle shield that you see here, that would speak to us as Northwest Natives, something that people would look at and say, okay, that's for me. Our friend Jason designed this eagle logo along with our Native Suicide Awareness ribbon. And a Washington person can identify this artwork as their own, as it is very specific to our region. So earlier I did tell you about how Eastern Washington and Western Washington are a lot different than each other. However, even a person in Eastern Washington can look at this symbolism and say, okay, that's our state, that's us. So it's something that we knew that everybody would be able to identify with. Next slide, please. Okay, some challenges we've had. We've had a couple. So gaining trust with Native people, Native communities. Are we real? When we say that your call will be answered by an all Native staff, is that true? Many Indigenous people, including myself and lots of people that I know, lack trust in many programs for a good reason. We often expect tribal and Indigenous programs to fail or to be operated by the wrong people. Okay, so here's some of our bigger challenges that we are conquering right now and we are taking care of. But one of them was being a real and true part of 988. And what that means is that a few weeks prior to the July 16th nationwide launch of 988, we learned that there wasn't really any intentional work being done to give the Native and Strong Lifeline in Washington State its own dial pad option. This number wasn't going to magically appear. So we always talk about like are they doing this? Are they doing that? So we had to become the they. It didn't make sense to us. We have been offered a 1-800 number for this line, but that doesn't make sense because 988 and the idea behind it was that people would remember those 3 digits. And we would prefer to have one more digit than an entire 1-800 number. So we did reach out to some of our friends and some of our friends at Vibrant Emotional Health to set up a meeting to discuss what our options were and if we had any options. We stated that our program was entirely fully staffed. Everyone was trained and we were ready to go, to include our branding and our messages. The only missing piece was that we did not have a number for people to press when they called 988 to get to us. So this piece is coming very soon and is in the works with a real launch date in the coming weeks. And I say that with full confidence because our friends at Vibrant, we are having a meeting this week, and we should have a date for everybody so that we can widely advertise this service in the state. And they will have a number such as 4 to press, and they will know exactly how to get to us. Some of our opportunities: promoting a culture of healing across Indian country, bringing AI, and mental health into focus, being a starting point and an example for others who wish to have a specific suicide and crisis line. Natives working together to make a difference for all of us. Okay, so let's talk about our sister program. Next slide, please. Okay, so working together, we're going to discuss the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub and the Native and Strong Lifeline, how they work together. So continuing care, the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub, we have resources, culturally relevant options, assistance with discharge planning from treatment centers, and coordination of care. Next slide, please. A little bit of background. The hub was developed in partnership with the Tribal-Centric Behavioral Health Advisory Board, the American Indian Health Commission, Volunteers of America Western Washington, the Healthcare Authority, and the Department of Health. Our purpose in the hub is to assist American Indian and Alaskan Natives seeking care across both the tribal and non-tribal systems, and to support tribes and other Indian healthcare providers to provide access to behavioral health and crisis services. Some of the responsibilities and duties of the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub include tracking bed capacity. We do that twice a day, following up on Lifeline referrals, including the Native and Strong Lifeline, coordinating care, providing Native-specific resources, in the future being a contact for tribal designated crisis responders, providing light case management, and getting feedback from clients so we know that our resources are good. And this is how the coordination happens. The hub is not a crisis line, but it is a service available from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. You would call the hub at the 1-800 number. You would be connected with a Hub Navigator. You would explain to that navigator which resources you or your client needs. That navigator would find those resources from our database. They would pass that information along to the caller. And then if the caller is okay with it, if they're allowed, we would follow up with that caller to see if that resource was relevant, was it useful, and are they working with our people in a good way? So answering the call, regional hub navigators. You see a map of Washington, and we have stars and the locations where we would like all of our hub navigators to be. So our home base is in Everett, Washington. Each star indicates where we'll have a navigator. And what this does is it allows for resource familiarity and for resources to be far-reaching, because this is a statewide service. I know as a local on Tulalip tribes that I have resources that not everybody has, and they're not always in a database. And so we want that for all the different areas of Washington. Our Native specific needs and resources. We are working with elders as a resource and cultural workers, as well as our regional support navigators. I love this slide so much. My great grandmother's there and my father, he finally made it to elder status. So we know that elders are a wealth of knowledge and they can help to guide us. We listen to our elders, and many of us have a need to learn from them. They want what is best for us all, and they want to pass on their knowledge whenever they can. Next slide, please. So some of the takeaways, again, this is a service that is available only in Washington State at this time, but I hope the best for every other state that wants to get involved. It is going live this fall. We will have a date announcement really, really soon. It is a 24/7 service in Washington, and for Washington area codes, it will be accessible by dialing 988. The Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub is already operating and is receiving calls for resources. It is a resource line, so think of like 211 for Native Americans. We provide both tribal and non-tribal resources in the hub. That's important because sometimes people want to use tribal resources and sometimes they don't. Or potentially they might live in like a behavioral health desert where there really isn't a lot of service around, but at least they can connect with someone that we know that knows how to take care of our people. And quickly, I'd just like to acknowledge our artist, again, Jason Leclaire for the Native and Strong Lifeline, and also our artist, Marissa Sylvester for the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub. The Smith family, including Denise Smith, Peter Smith, Corey Smith, Dane Smith, Skylar Smith, and Dayton Smith for the use of their pictures for this. And everyone's favorite part, the boring stuff at the end, all the references. But that is really all that I have to share with you today. So I've said a lot and I will turn it back over to Holly or Brian.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. And Rochelle, I think we should all stand up on our chairs and give you a huge applause because it is incredibly significant that when the federal government rolled out 988 in the country, it's a big deal, you know, to get a 3-digit help assist support nationally. But to only have one native 988 number in the country, in Washington State, is an incredible accomplishment. And I am guessing it's not always an easy road because you're working in the middle of the national 988 system. And I'm also assuming that even though there's all these good-hearted people that are designing in every state the 988 systems, no doubt they're not good-hearted, but their knowledge about Native people and Native needs is likely pretty small, which means that there's a lot of responsibility on you and our good friend Shelby Rowe, who Shelby is the Native National Director for the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, SPRC, that's now under Dr. Dolores Bigfoot's house, so to speak, in Oklahoma. And I know that Shelby and you have been at the national tables as well, informing and educating the national 988 system on why this tribal piece is important. And just even the thing, not the thing, but the attention you all took to selecting the name, selecting the logo, doing all of that, what some may think is not that important, but actually we know as Native people, it is the foundation of it all, that it has to be right. And so I think everything you shared is really phenomenal. And I do really have tremendous respect for you all creating the only, and we hope not forever, but at this point, the only native 988 system in the United States. So kudos to you all. So, and yeah, thank you, April, for your question about, she was puzzled that the 988 rollout did not have any tribal component, and it does not. Nationally, working on it. Advocates are working on it, but so I'm gonna pass it on to Olivia Davis, and she is our facilitator for the next stage, what we're doing in this conversation. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. That was just amazing. And I'm hoping you're seeing some of the many comments about what a great presentation it was and the importance of this work. And again, I am Olivia Davis. I did introduce myself in the chat box. I see myself as a non-native guest in this native space. And I just invite you to share kind of what's resonating with you from Rochelle's presentation, or if you have any questions or comments for her. We have a few minutes where we can answer some questions.
If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature, and we can unmute you.
Yep. And I do see from Marilyn Wismiller, I'm hoping I'm saying right, Marilyn, you're saying that what resonated with me is how small I feel in the enormity of what is needed at each level, whether it be native or non-native. I'll start with advancing my knowledge of education services and resources available and spreading that outward into our 15 clinic network. I'm wondering, Rochelle, part of when I was listening to what you were talking about, your presentation, and also reflecting on Marilyn's, reflection, you talked a little bit about challenges, but could you talk just for a few minutes about how did you even start? Where did you start? Did you get a group of folks together, or how did you begin?
So it's a difficult question, but I'll do what I can with the time we have. So like I said, I joined Volunteers of America from an elders program from before. So I moved over, I heard about a potential for a tribal 988. I didn't know much about it. But when I arrived there, Washington State said, hey, we have 988 funding. And the American Indian Health Commission, I believe, advocated, they said, what if there was a tribal component? And so they said, well, let's do this. So they contracted with Volunteers of America, Western Washington. And they said, well, who's going to lead this? It's got to be a tribal person. We have to find someone who can do this who's tribal. So I said I arrived there just in January, so it wasn't very long ago. And they had a Native and Strong coordinator already. And we really just sat down and we said, we have this much of a budget. We have 2 people right now. We have to start thinking and building, how would we want it to be? How would I want it to be as an Indigenous person calling this line? What would I need to see? And so like Holly said again, too, it was important for us to get those kind of the branding components down so people could identify with us. And that was really where we started. And then the hiring and how do we get the right people? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. I also have a question from Casey Ward Freeman. And the question is, what was the process of consultation with the tribes in Washington when starting this? Sorry if I missed it at the beginning.
No, that's okay. You didn't miss it at the beginning. So the Tribal Centric Behavioral Health Advisory Board is, I believe, also hosted by the American Indian Health Commission. And so they invite all the tribal leaders. And I think that I want to say we meet a couple of times a month. But we meet and we hope that the tribal leaders will come and join us. I wish there was a little more involvement, but we do consult with them. Like, what would you like to see for your people? And this is not one tribe, but it is several tribes, and all tribes in Washington, as well as urban Indian organizations, are invited to the table. Additionally, for my team and I, what we do is we actually directly write letters to the tribal leaders with those personal touches, as in signing them really, and giving gifts and just knowing that, hey, we are here and we want to hear from you. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I think I might have just 2 more minutes. I have a couple of questions from Denise Newman. And the question is, so is the goal that the call tree will eventually and soon say, welcome to 988 to access a Native or Indigenous counselor, press pound. Is that the goal? Okay.
Yes, that is, that's almost exactly it. Like I said, if you call right now, 988 in Washington, they'll say, if you're a veteran, please press 1 for veteran services, whichever number it is in Spanish. Like I said, I don't know, but I know that's another option. And then that other option will be press this number for the Native and Strong Lifeline.
Wonderful. And is there minimal training that would be expected for counselors?
So if you are a Lifeline counselor for any 988 service, you will go through a 4 to 6 week training. Our tribal counselors go through that exact same training. However, we have added cultural and traditional components to that, as well as healing and resilience and intergenerational trauma.
Wow, that's pretty significant. And then the last one, do we know anything about expected or projected call volumes and then over a 12-month period? Do you have any sense of that?
We don't yet. So what is going to happen as soon as we have our date and our dial pad option is we are going to collect that data to find out, what the need is and how many tribal people are calling. Some people have heard about us already in Washington State. Some of the tribes have heard. And so we already are taking Native calls. Our staff is already taking Lifeline calls. So we are very excited to find out. I know that we are a small percentage of the entire population, but because of our suicide rates and crisis rates, we think that this will be really significant, and we think that we will have a pretty decent call volume. So more to come on this later.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. I think I covered all the questions in the chat box. Thank you again for answering them so succinctly and for your presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Holly. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, both of you, Olivia and Rochelle, and everyone on the call to listen carefully to this information for your really good questions. I wanted to mention that both the Native 988 model, Native and Strong, love the name, and the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub are two good examples of supports for life transformation plans. One of the things I particularly like about the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub is it's an assist in seeking care in both tribal and non-tribal worlds. And the process that you're doing, and I think you said the Washington Indian Behavioral Health Hub tracks us twice a day. They're tracking the bed availability. So that kind of collaboration and organized system to kind of constantly be scanning availability of support services for Native people is really important. So congratulations on that as well. You have said so many important things, but I will be thinking about you a lot, Rochelle, and sending you strength and good thoughts, because this is a really important task that you're leading. You're negotiating and working with both major, large non-Native entities as well as Native. You're an advocate for Native people, and you're working in crisis response, for Pete's sake. Everybody that's on the call that's done any crisis response work knows that is the toughest and most important work and life-saving work. So we will definitely be thinking about you, and I just want to share those last thoughts and how impressed I am with your selection process, how happy I am that you thought bigger than just Coastal Salish, just Washington tribes, although I live in Washington, so that's super important. But not everyone that lives in Washington State is a Washington tribal member. So lots of thought and everything you all have done, and so we're with you all the way, and keep us posted. We'll bring you back for an update. And yes, April, crisis work is frontline training. No kidding. All right.
Holly, thank you so much. I appreciated it. Thank you.
Oh, sure. And did you have any closing thoughts, closing comment you wanted to make before we move on?
Just that I hope that, I will be able to come back a year from now and share this work with you all, and so that we can have an update. Thank you so much. I appreciate my time with you all.
Thank you. Brian?
Yes, don't forget to complete your survey. It is on the screen and it's also in your chat. Emily has posted it a couple times for you. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email Bernice Jordan or myself, and our email addresses are on the screen.
And just one thing, Brian, because it came up in the chat several times, people will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, correct? Can you speak to that?
Yes, we will send out the link to the PowerPoint and the link to the recording on the YouTube channel, on the USET YouTube channel by the end of the week. So we'll have that.
Wonderful. Yep. Terrific. And so in October next month, same place, same time, we want to see you all back. Next month, we have the real pleasure of having Dr. Joseph Gahn, Professor Gahn from Harvard, who's a Grovant tribal member and incredibly brilliant. And his whole focus is on reframing Native mental health. So he's going to talk on that next month, fourth Tuesday, the same time. And it's a don't miss that one because he's got a lot to say. And so with that, I think we close out and wish you all a good day. And again, of course, we end with a Native song or spoken word.
Stone Mother. 1. I was born in the desert, learned to cherish water like it was created from tears. I grew up hearing the legend, the lesson of the Stone Mother who cried enough cries to make an entire lake from sadness. From her, we learned what must be done, and that the sacrifices you make for your people are sacred. We are all related, and sometimes it takes a revolution to be awakened. You see, the power of a single tear lies in the story. It's birthed from feeling and following the pain as it echoes into the canyon of grieving. It's the path you stumble and walk until you push and claw your way through to acceptance. For us, stories have always been lessons, too. I remember my grandmother was well versed in dirt, the way the earth clung to her hands as if it were a part of her. We come from the earth, so she tended the seeds as living beings, planted her garden full of foods traditional to the land, and handled them with care. Every tree, plant, or rock has a spirit, she said. Hear it. 3. I listen. When my mother says words are seeds, and to be careful of the words you say, I pray. For I know each seed carries a story. My mother taught me that water is the source of all living things, and to honor life like the circle we sit in for ceremony. From the doorway in to the doorway out, life is about all our relations. 4. Before I was born, they tried to silence us, pierced our tongues with needles, then taught our then girl grandmothers how to sew like machines. You see, colonialism has always been about them, not seeing us as human but as object, a thing. Conquest meant they saw our bodies as land full of resources waiting to be extracted and exploited. Our land was stolen. Our language, our grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers, sisters, mothers, brothers, daughters, sons, children, nieces, aunts, uncles, nephews, and ancestors. Our Mother Earth holds our histories in her dirt. But today she burns not in the traditional ways once taught, controlled and deliberate. Today she burns, desperate for all to resist fossil fuels, the drilling and the black snake named greed that swallows everything. 5. When you lose something, you hope it will be found. When something is stolen, you want it returned. We've had our land stolen, and we're losing it again unless we all take action for the climate to change. 6. Land back is a demand, a stand against the age of exploration and extraction, a call for the time of reconciliation, the now of restoration. Land back is an understanding that tomorrow isn't promised, but today we can return the power to the earth and her stewards. And those who wish to stand with us must take action beyond the performative, where Indigenous consulting isn't just a costume of free and informed consent, where consulting with tribal nations isn't just a box one checks without due diligence, where co-management isn't co-opted just for the optics of equity, diversity, and justice. Stand with us as accomplices. Follow our lead, for we have always been well-versed in survival. We were shaped by fire, made from lightning and dirt-covered hands that know when to ignite healing. Now is the time. Let us not drown in Mother Earth's tears. Mother Earth has a spirit. and she's asking us to listen.
Thank you all.